Amanda's body convulsed once against the mattress, and the monitor above her bed screamed a single, endless note. "We're losing the baby's heartbeat," a nurse shouted, and Dojin's whole world narrowed to that one sentence. Then he saw Dr. Han's hand, drifting toward a dial on the ventilator, with a calm that didn't belong in a room where two lives were slipping away. Dojin moved before he thought, seizing the man's wrist and bending it back at an angle that made Han's face go bloodless. "What are you doing to her?" "Sir, step back." "What are you doing?" A crash cart rattled past them. Hansuk, Dojin's mother, a woman who hadn't raised her voice in 40 years, pressed both hands over Amanda's limp fingers and made a sound that had no words in it at all. "Everyone out now," the attending shouted, and a second nurse threw her arm across the doorway like a barricade. Security arrived, and it took both men to gently pull Hansuk back from the bed rail while she sobbed that she would not let go. Not again, not after already burying one daughter. Dojin stayed exactly where he was, arms crossed, refusing every order to leave, daring anyone to remove him the way they'd removed his mother. "Sir, you need to." No. Nobody argued with him twice. Dr. Han straightened his coat and addressed the room like a man who'd done nothing wrong at all. "She's stabilizing. I'll notify the attending physician and update the family in the hall." Nobody questioned the tone. He walked out with the unhurried authority of someone whose job it was to walk out, and it would be hours before Dojin understood exactly what that sentence had been covering for. In the doorway he passed, without acknowledging, the one person who hadn't moved, hadn't flinched, hadn't done anything but watch. Yuna, dressed like she'd come from a gala, arms folded, watching the flat line with something closer to curiosity than guilt. Dojin crossed the room and put his body between her and the bed. "Get out. I only came to see if the rumors were true." Her eyes flicked to the monitor, cool as glass. "We have a pulse," the nurse called, and the line staggered, caught, steadied. A beat later, softer, almost disbelieving. Fetal cardiac activity confirmed the baby's heartbeat is back. Dojin's knees nearly buckled with a relief so total it felt like drowning in reverse, and in the half-second his attention broke. Toward that sound, Yuna was already gone, heels clicking unhurried down the corridor like a woman leaving a party that had bored her. Nobody stopped her. Nobody yet understood that the woman most responsible for this had just walked out completely untouched, or that she'd be back before morning, with help. Quick question before we go further. If the people trying to erase your family had a chairman's title on one hand and a hospital badge on the other, would you have known which one to fear first? This is the Seoul Chronicles. If you believe evil should never get to call itself an accident, hit subscribe, because this story is about to get a lot more dangerous. None of this had a name yet. 3 months ago, Amanda Whitfield had walked into the Beck family home a stranger and left it by the end of one dinner, wearing the nickname Han Suk, reserved only for daughters she loved. Tae-yang slid extra food onto her plate like affection was a language he spoke fluently, and everyone else was still learning. So when Dojin stood up months later, voice cracking, and told his parents Amanda was pregnant, Han Suk wept into her sleeve, and Tae-yang gripped Amanda's hand hard enough to leave a mark, whispering thank you, like she'd handed him a reason to keep living. None of them knew they were celebrating the child that would soon put a target on Amanda's back. Yuna Min had spent her whole life assuming the Beck merger belonged to her two shipping empires stitched together by marriage, the way her family had always planned, until Dojin chose an outsider with no name worth cataloging over a woman groomed specifically to sit beside him in boardroom photos for the next 40 years. Yuna hadn't cried when she found out. She'd started making calls instead. "The merger cannot survive that pregnancy," her mother said one evening, swirling wine she had no intention of drinking. "Then remove the obstacle," came the answer from the next room, Chairman Min, not even glancing up from a folder of shipping manifests he was reviewing with a MinCorp executive. Numbers that had nothing to do with weddings and everything to do with a slow, Deliberate collapse being engineered inside the Beck family's company. Nobody said Amanda's name. Nobody needed to. She was simply the obstacle standing between them and everything they intended to have, one way or another. Amanda found the first thread of it by accident, a document window left open on Dojin's home computer, forwarded from someone inside MinCorp with a conscience that had arrived a decade too late to matter to his own career. Wire transfers, falsified manifests, a liquidity crisis built to swallow the Beck company whole. Footsteps on the stairs, 20 seconds, maybe less, before someone reached the office. She didn't close the window. She plugged in the small flash drive she kept in her bag for exactly this kind of emergency, dragged the folder across the screen, and watched the transfer bar crawl forward while the footsteps got louder. Come on. Come on. It hit 100% 2 seconds before the door opened. Everything all right, Mrs. Beck? Just checking the weather, Amanda said, smiling, heart slamming against her ribs. She didn't yet know what she was holding. She only knew it mattered enough that someone, somewhere, would eventually notice it was gone. What she didn't know, what she wouldn't find out for weeks, was that one file in that folder had frozen mid-transfer unfinished. The one file that could prove who had ordered Amanda removed hadn't copied at all. The terrace at the Min family's private event hall looked out over the whole city, gold and glittering, and Amanda had only stepped outside because the noise inside had started pressing on her temples. One hand rested over the small curve beneath her dress. She didn't hear the heels behind her until they were close. You should have stayed in America, Yuna said. Yuna, whatever you think you know, you opened a folder that wasn't meant for your eyes. Yuna stepped closer, and Amanda stepped back until the railing pressed cold against her spine. And I know none of that matters once you're gone. Someone will find out what you did, Amanda breathed. I already sent what I could get. It wasn't everything. It wasn't even most of it. But it was enough to make Yuna's expression flicker, just for a second, before it went cold again. She never got to finish the sentence. 2 hands slammed into her shoulders, and instead of reaching out to catch herself, Amanda's arms folded instinctively across her stomach, shielding the only thing she thought to protect in the half-second she had left. The last thing she saw was Yuna's face, perfectly calm, like a woman correcting a mistake. Then the ground took the rest of the choice out of her hands. Dojin didn't remember the drive to the hospital. He remembered Han-suk's scream through the phone. He remembered Taeyang's hands shaking too hard to unlock his own car. He remembered a doctor saying placental abruption in the same breath as asking whether he had someone who could sign forms because his own hands wouldn't hold a pen steady. He remembered, once, alone at her bedside before any of the machines started screaming, I haven't even finished the nursery yet. You don't get to leave before we hear that heartbeat. She hadn't answered. Hours later, Chairman Min and CEO Choi walked into that same lobby like men inspecting a job well done. The chairman's eyes lifted briefly toward the ICU floor sign above the elevator's one quick glance, checking, before he straightened a cufflink and let his gaze settle on Dojin instead. Such a tragic accident, he said. These terraces really should have higher railings. Dojin crossed the lobby and had the older man by his collar before either of them saw it coming. Say that again. Choi didn't even raise his voice. Careful, Mr. Beck. Grief makes men reckless, and reckless men tend to lose companies, starting with whatever's left of your fathers. Security was already moving before Dojin let go. He didn't want to. He had to. And upstairs, 3 doors down from where Amanda lay, a nurse pulled a door quietly shut behind her, the same door Dr. Han was now standing in front of alone, checking his watch like a man with somewhere else to be. He waited until the corridor emptied. Then he reached into his coat pocket, and his fingers closed around a second syringe, one he'd been told, very quietly, to use before morning. Dr. Han's fingers had barely closed around the syringe when the door behind him opened, not the quiet click of a nurse's shoe, but the heavy tread of men who didn't belong in scrubs. "Step away from the door," one of them said. 4 private security officers, hired within the hour by Taeyang and answering to no hospital administrator, no board, no one but the Beck family. Dr. Han's composure cracked for the first time all night. "I'm this patient's physician." "Not anymore." The lead officer already had a phone to his ear, confirming what Taeyang had suspected the moment his son described a man reaching for a ventilator dial that wasn't his to touch. "He's suspended from this floor as of now. Search him before he leaves." They found the second syringe in his coat pocket. Nobody said a word about it out loud. Taeyang had given specific instructions that nothing be reported to hospital administration yet, not until he understood exactly how far up the chain this went. Dr. Han was walked out in silence, and the silence was worse than shouting would have been. By morning, no one entered that ICU wing without clearance from Taeyang himself. When Madame Kang arrived at the nurse's station an hour later, flanked by Yuna, demanding to see the poor girl with a tenderness that fooled absolutely no one in that hallway, Han Suk was already standing in front of the door. "You will not step past this line," Han Suk said, and her voice didn't shake the way it had the night before. "I only came to offer support," Madame Kang said, smiling with her mouth and nothing else. "You came to see if she was still breathing." Han Suk didn't blink. "She is, and every day she keeps breathing is a day your daughter has to live with what she did. Get out of my son's hallway." Yuna's jaw tightened, but for the first time, she had nothing cold enough to say back. "If you'd asked me, back when I still believed love was the only thing worth fighting for, whether Dojin could become someone this ruthless, I'd have told you no, not him, not the man who cried at his own wedding. I didn't understand yet that ruthlessness and love aren't opposites. Sometimes they're the same thing, wearing different faces." Reporter Jin went live at 9 that morning, exactly as scheduled, exactly as he had for 11 years, poised, polished, already halfway through, a story about the tragic instability surrounding the Beck family, when his producer's voice cracked through his earpiece. "Jin, we've got a breaking feed override. I don't know who authorized it." "What are you talking about? We're on air." The studio monitor behind him changed before he could finish the sentence. His own face, 10 years younger, sitting across from a MinCorp executive in grainy hidden camera footage, discussing exactly how much silence cost for exactly which scandal. Then another clip. Then another. A decade of blackmail folders Dojin had spent one sleepless night organizing into a single devastating broadcast package, timed to detonate during Jin's own show. Jin's mouth opened. Nothing came out. The red light on the camera stayed on the entire time, and 3 million people watched a man's career die in real time on his own set. He didn't even make it to a graceful exit. Security walked onto his own set to remove him while he was still talking, still denying, still reaching for a version of events nobody in that studio was buying anymore. Nobody found his laptop afterward. By the time anyone thought to look, his assistant had already wiped it clean and vanished with it. One loose thread nobody had accounted for. Director Park's downfall took longer, and it was worse for him because of it. Taeyang called the emergency board meeting himself, and he let Park walk in without warning, let him take his seat at the head of the table like nothing was wrong, let him open with routine remarks about quarterly projections before sliding a single folder across the table. "Explain this," Taeyang said. Park's eyes moved down the page, then further. His hand, Amanda would later hear from someone who'd been in that room, had actually started to shake before he even reached the third falsified manifest. This can be explained. This is a misunderstanding of the accounting. Explain the wire transfer with your signature on it." Park didn't have an answer for that one. He tried 3 different ones anyway, each worse than the last, while every shareholder in that room watched a man's 20-year career unravel in real time. Security escorted him out past photographers Taeyang had made sure were waiting, but not before Park, in one final act of spite, reached for the intercom and quietly ordered his assistant to clear his office of every physical file before anyone thought to seal it. By the time anyone got upstairs, his office was empty. Whatever else he'd been hiding was already gone. Chairman Min was not a man who went down without taking something with him. The moment word reached him that Park had been arrested in front of cameras, he didn't panic, he moved. Every account still liquid shifted within the hour into 3 shell companies that existed on paper only. A judge who owed him a favor from a decade ago got a phone call that resulted, by that evening, in an injunction freezing the Beck family's own assets pending a fraud investigation Chairman Min had manufactured from nothing. It wasn't theoretical. By the next morning, it was real in a way that made Dojin's stomach turn. Payroll for 400 dock workers didn't go through. Taeyong stood in front of employees who'd worked for his family for 20 years and told them, voice steadier than he felt, that it would be resolved within the week, knowing he had no way to guarantee that. The hospital billing office called twice about Amanda's account, polite and apologetic, informing Dojin that the corporate insurance plan tied to Beck Corp had been flagged for review and that he might need to arrange alternate payment. He paid it himself, in cash, that afternoon, hands shaking with a fury he hadn't let himself feel yet. Beck Corp stock dropped 11% before noon. 2 banks that had financed their shipping contracts for a decade called to discuss the relationship going forward, a phrase that meant exactly what it sounded like. He's countersuing us, Taeyong said, staring at the injunction with something close to disbelief. He's using our own tactics against us, and it's working. Then we've taught him something, Dojin said, jaw tight. Let's teach him he learned it too late. It bought Chairman Min exactly 1 day. But 1 day, in a story like this one, is enough time to do a great deal of damage. It was somewhere in the middle of that frozen, furious day that Amanda's fingers moved. Dojin almost missed it. Then her hand curled, weak, deliberate, around his. Dojin. His name, barely more than air. I'm here, I've got you. Her eyes found his, unfocused, searching. Her lips moved before her voice caught up to them. Baby? Dojin opened his mouth, and nothing came out. His throat had closed around the answer he needed to give her, and for one unbearable second, he just held her hand tighter, blinking hard, unable to trust his own voice not to break in half. Still fighting, he finally managed, barely above a whisper. You're both still with me. Her eyes filled, and for a moment she didn't say anything at all, just breathed, like she was checking whether that was true by feeling it rather than believing it. We're fighting, she finally whispered. Both of us, still fighting. He didn't remember what he said back. He remembered pressing his forehead to her hand and breathing for what felt like the first time in 3 days, and he remembered that whatever mercy he might have still owed the people responsible for this, burned away completely in that room, not into rage, into something colder and far more permanent. Have you found the drive yet? She asked. Right before her eyes closed again, the one thing she still remembered clearly, even through everything else the fall had taken from her. Not yet, he admitted. Find it, she breathed. Before she does. She slipped back under a few minutes later. The machines held steady. Yuna was already moving before Amanda finished the sentence, though she'd never know that. Chairman Min's counterattack had bought them 1 day of frozen assets and 1 manufactured investigation. But Yuna understood, in a way her father refused to, that none of it mattered if the flash drive Amanda had hidden ever surfaced in a courtroom. 6 allies gone, 2 left. And somewhere in a locked drawer at the private event hall, the same terrace, the same railing, sat the one piece of physical evidence that could still bury all of them. She drove there herself. No driver, no assistant, nobody to witness what she was about to do. Before she even reached the office, she stopped at the security room off the main hallway and pulled the hard drive from the surveillance system with her bare hands, snapping the cable, pocketing it. Whatever footage existed of tonight, of the past month, of anything, would never make it to a courtroom either. She found the fuse panel next and killed power to the entire east wing, plunging the corridor into darkness, lit only by her phone's flashlight, buying herself time in case anyone came looking before she was done. It was reckless. It was also effective. By the time she reached the office door, there was no camera left in the building that had seen her arrive. She was still, after everything, dangerous. Cornered animals usually are. The drawer slid open under the light of her phone. It was empty. Yuna stood frozen over it for one long second, mind racing through every person who could have known it was there. Her assistant, a bribed staff member, someone she hadn't accounted for, and that was when she heard the office door click shut behind her, sealing her into the dark with whoever had just closed it. Footsteps, unhurried, crossing the room toward her. Then a voice one she didn't recognize, low and almost amused, close enough that she felt it more than heard it. Looking for this? The voice behind Yuna in the dark didn't belong to a ghost or to security or to anyone she'd been braced to fight. It belonged to Dojin. He stepped into the beam of her phone's flashlight, holding the flash drive between two fingers, the real one, recovered hours earlier by federal agents after Amanda's assistant. Acting on instructions Amanda had whispered to her weeks before the fall, had quietly moved it from that drawer the very night of the attack. Behind him, the office lights snapped back on. Power restored the moment Yuna had walked into the trap she thought she was setting. Looking for this? He said again, quieter now. That proves nothing, Yuna said, backing toward the terrace doors. A drive, some files. You think that's enough to end my family? I think a federal prosecutor will have opinions about that, Dojin said, and behind him, agents were already filling the doorway. She ran anyway, some final animal instinct overriding logic, bolting past him and out onto the terrace itself, into wind and rain, and the same railing that had once waited for Amanda. She didn't get far. Chairman Min was already there, dragged onto that terrace by two agents, phone in hand, still barking orders into a line that had been disconnected minutes earlier. Do you have any idea who I am? He shouted at the nearest agent, rain plastering silver hair to his skull. I will have your badge. I will have this entire operation buried by morning. Sir, you're not in a position to bury anything, the agent said, and there was something almost bored in his voice. The tone of a man who'd heard that threat from smaller and smaller men all week. Chairman Min turned on Dojin instead, changing tactics without missing a breath. There's still time to walk this back, son. Whatever number you want, whatever position in the company, whatever settlement makes this disappear, name it. I built an empire out of nothing. I know how to make a problem go away. You've been trying to make a problem go away for months, Dojin said. The problem is my wife, and she's still breathing. It was an accident, Yuna snapped, water streaming down her face, though whether it was rain or something else was hard to tell anymore. She slipped. Everyone keeps saying, I pushed her. Nobody was up there to see it. The camera in the corner of that terrace disagrees with you, said the lead agent, stepping forward with a tablet already in hand. We restored the footage your people thought they'd wiped an hour ago. He turned the screen so Chairman Min could see it. Grainy, rain-warped footage, Yuna's hands on Amanda's shoulders, the shove, the fall. You said you erased everything, Chairman Min hissed at his daughter. I erased what I could reach, Yuna said, and for the first time, her voice cracked all the way open. I didn't have time. You told me to hurry, you said the drawer. You never once asked if I'd actually finished. Don't you dare put this on me. You told me to remove the obstacle. Yuna was shouting now, mascara running, every careful edge of her finally gone. You said it like it was nothing, like she was a line item. I did what you built me to do, and now you're standing here acting like you never said a word. That's enough, Chairman Min barked, but it landed hollow. There was nothing commanding left in his voice, only fear dressed up as authority, and everyone on that terrace could hear the difference. The agent nodded to a colleague, who produced a laptop and plugged in the drive right there on the terrace table, shielding the screen from the rain with a jacket while the footage loaded. It wasn't just the fall. It was months of it wire transfers, with Chairman Min's authorization codes, audio of Madam Kang discussing medical complications over wine, a message thread between Yuna and Dr. Han discussing timing, a voice memo of Chairman Min telling Choi to make 60 days out of 90. Every conspirator, in their own words, in their own handwriting, laid out on one small drive Amanda had risked her life to protect. Chairman Min watched his own voice play back to him in the rain, and, for the first time since Dojin had known him, said nothing at all. "There's still the shell accounts," he finally tried, weaker now, grasping. "Untraceable. I can make you both wealthy men beyond anything Beck Corp could. We already froze those this morning," Hansuk said, stepping forward beside her son, rain soaking through her coat, her voice steady as stone. "You taught me that trick yourself, years ago, at a gala, bragging about how clever it was. I've had good use for it since." Chairman Min's legs seemed to give slightly, and an agent caught his arm before he could pretend it was anything other than what it was. "You pushed her off the edge," Dojin said, stepping between them, rain running down a face that had gone entirely, permanently cold, and called it an accident. He let the words sit there, over the wind, over Yuna's ragged breathing, over her father's silence. "So my family and I made sure your fall was permanent." Nobody argued. Nobody had anything left to argue with. What followed made global headlines within the hour. Chairman Min Suk-chul and Madame Kang were walked out in handcuffs on live broadcast feeds that reached 3 continents by morning, the same network's reporter Jin had once controlled, now reporting, with brutal irony, on the empire that had paid for his silence for years. Every asset formally seized. The sentencing hearing, when it came weeks later, lasted less than 20 minutes. The evidence left no room for negotiation, no clever defense, no delay. The judge read Chairman Min's own recorded voice back to him in open court before delivering a sentence that stripped him of everything he'd spent a lifetime building. Yuna received no mercy either. The courtroom that sentenced her had already watched, via the recovered footage, exactly what calm looked like on the face of a woman shoving a pregnant stranger off a terrace. Maximum security, no parole hearing for decades, her name reduced overnight from heiress to headline, from socialite to cautionary tale. There was no leniency left anywhere in that verdict. There was only the sound of 10 conspirators, one by one, finally facing consequences that had been engineered patiently and completely by a family they had underestimated from the very beginning. Amanda opened her eyes 3 days later to sunlight instead of monitors. Dojin was there before she'd even finished blinking, his hand already wrapped around hers like it had never left. Hansuk was crying before Amanda said a single word, and Taeyang stood at the foot of the bed with both hands pressed over his mouth. "The baby," Amanda managed, voice raw. "Is perfect," Dojin said, something in his voice finally cracking all the way open. "She's perfect. You're both here. You're both safe." Amanda pressed her free hand to her stomach and felt, for the first time in what had felt like a lifetime, the small, stubborn flutter of a life that had survived a fall meant to end it. Months later, the Beck family estate, filled with more warmth than its walls had held in years. Rice cake and jollof rice shared the same table. Hansuk held her granddaughter like she'd waited her whole life for exactly this moment. Amanda still flinched, sometimes near high railings that part hadn't disappeared, and she'd stopped expecting it to. Scars and peace, she'd learned, could occupy the same body. Dojin found her on the balcony that evening, their daughter asleep against her chest, and wrapped both of them in his arms without saying anything at all. "They pushed me off an edge and called it an accident. They were wrong to think silence and money could bury that truth the same way they'd hoped to bury me. If you've ever been underestimated or dismissed, I hope this reminded you that your fight is worth finishing. This has been the Seoul Chronicles. I'll see you in the next story.